Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. So we're just off the back of the 2021 Italian Grand Prix at Monza, one of the most iconic tracks in Formula One in the history of the sport, and made even more unique this year because of the fact that it was the second time in the sport's history we've had sprint qualifying. And no, I'm not talking about the incident. Okay, I don't want any drama today. The first sprint race was, of course, at Silverstone earlier in the year, and it has mixed reception. I was quite positive going into it. I thought it was okay. I was there for the Sunday. I wasn't there for the sprint race. I thought it was okay. I quite enjoyed it. Fernando made some good little moves. And I do think 2021 is the year to test these things out. We can't allow ourselves to be immune to any type of change. I think there's always things that we can improve and do better and strive to improve the sport that we all enjoy to make it even better. But of course, it does have to be the right kind of change. So why exactly are we sprint qualifying in the first place? Well, Formula One's official stance on why they've introduced sprint qualifying is to help the fans, is to give more competitive running on more days so that fans, particularly fans who visit the Grand Prix, who watch the Grand Prix in person, get more bang for their buck because they're seeing more competitive running. Because at the moment, Friday is just practice. You're very unlikely to watch Friday practice unless you're really into F1. I mean, even I never really watch FP1, sometimes FP2. The current format we have has been in place, I believe, from 2010, where you have Thursday press conferences, Friday FP1, FP2, Saturday FP3, then qualifying, and then the big race on Sunday. But this new sprint qualifying format changes things around. So you have FP1 as normal, but then instead of FP2 on Friday, you have qualifying. Then what usually is FP3 becomes FP2, and then what is usually qualifying becomes a sprint race, or sprint quali as they insist on calling it. That's a 100-kilometre race around the track, so it's about a third of the typical F1 race distance. So you're getting rid of a testing session and replacing it with a little race, which in theory sounds fantastic. Like, the more testing, the more the teams know, the less unpredictable the result is likely to be. So I'm all for less testing. But ultimately, I know F1 have tried to sell sprint quali as, we're doing this for the fans. But really, I don't think that's true. I think the main reason, the main kind of motivation behind sprint qualifying is to get more overall eyeballs on the sport, even if that means diehard F1 fans who love qualifying on a Saturday are now going to have to miss it because they're at work on Friday. The F1 audience has exploded over the last couple of years. There's way more people interested in Formula One, and that's what F1 are going to be, more focused on, the overall eyeballs, because that means that the sponsors get a better return of investment. That means they attract more sponsors, more money in the sport. There's a really good tweet from F1 Broadcasting comparing the viewing figures from the Dutch Grand Prix FP2 Friday afternoon running to the Italian Grand Prix Friday afternoon qualifying. 114,000 viewers, FP2, 442,000 qualifying. Granted, qualifying is happening a little bit later on Friday, but that's a 287% increase in overall eyeballs consuming a Friday afternoon session. That's huge. Because also moving that qualifying session on Friday as late as possible, that opens up, west coast of the US. All of a sudden they can tune in first thing in the morning at a not complete ridiculous time, about 8, 9 a.m. and consume it live as well. I mean, you could push it super late at certain tracks like Abu Dhabi and Singapore, but I mean, you don't want to be selecting which tracks to do sprints at based on if they've got floodlights or not. Ideally, I suppose, but I guess that could work. It is a very difficult balance to strike. We want to make the sport as accessible to as many people around the world as possible. It's a global sport, and that's always going to be difficult. I'm sure plenty of you Americans and Australians out there have very little sympathy because most of it is built around European time, because that is where the majority of the fan base is and historically always has been. But again, this new format is clearly offering more to fans who are there in person, and you don't have to take my word for it. My good friend, my Veloce co-host, Aldas, was there at the Silverstone sprint on Friday. What did you think, mate?
Being at Silverstone for the first ever sprint quali in F1 history, my biggest positive has to be that it made the event of actually going to a Grand Prix so much better. When you're actually going to a Grand Prix yourself, it's not just about the racing, it's about the cars, about the fans, about the circuit and everything that goes along with that. And the fact that we had a competitive session in each of the 3 days, it just made it so much better because every single day you're looking forward to something. Every single day there was a highlight, whether it was Lewis's lap, Max's obviously a win in the sprint quali, and then that really chaotic race that we had on the Sunday as well. Paying obviously a lot of money to go and see a Grand Prix, I feel like you also got more for your money, so that is something as well.
See, look, he loved it. And look, ultimately, yes, I know the people who actually can go to a race is a very small portion of the overall fan base, but that small portion is incredibly important. That has to be top of F1's priority list, as far as I'm concerned. It's the same with football when we're talking about the Super League. Yes, that might have meant that more fans overall around the world would have got to view the games, but the core, hardcore football fans who go to matches week in, week out would have suffered for it, and that's not acceptable. So it sounds pretty perfect, right? What's not to love? It's not perfect. I've spoken about my work before YouTube before, right? So graphic design was what I kind of focused on. I did a bit of photography, a bit of animation on the side as well, and obviously video editing. And I know there's plenty of you out there who would love the idea of like a creative career, but maybe don't see it as a realistic option or wouldn't know where to start. Well, today's video sponsor Skillshare may well be the thing you've been waiting for to give those creative ambitions a go. Skillshare has thousands of vetted courses covering graphic design, animation, creative writing, music production, photography, marketing, entrepreneurship, and some more. Now, for any budding Formula One engineers out there, I found a course that might be for you. Louis Foreman's Aerospace Engineering Introduction and Fundamentals. 1 hour 41 of content split into 13 bite-sized sections. There is significant crossover, I know for a fact, between aerospace and F1. If you're dreaming of an F1 car development job one day, aerospace engineering could well be your route in. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare Premium. You might as well give it a try, nothing to lose, and you never know, there could be a course on there that actually turns out to be super valuable to you, so give it a go. Let's get into the negatives, the downsides of sprint qualifying, shall we? I've already mentioned the fans who are going to miss out on qualifying on Fridays, and that is a big problem and a big shame, and pushing the session as late as possible should hopefully help with that, maybe like 5-6 p.m. UK time. But again, it's like the world doesn't revolve around the UK, so it's hard to strike that balance, especially if you're taking away qualifying from fans who have been able to watch it on a Saturday for their whole lives. But now let's talk about the actual 100-kilometre sprint race itself. I haven't really delved into that too much, but look, it hasn't been the most exciting race. We've only seen 2, and neither of them were the most enthralling. You know, at Monza, obviously it helped that Hamilton had a terrible start because that, you know, made a bit of drama there. You had Fernando making a move through. Gasly lost his front wing because he ran into the back of Ricciardo. It was exciting seeing the McLarens up there, don't get me wrong, but if they were just the normal teams that we typically expect to be at the top, I don't think it would have been as interesting, you know. And again, at Silverstone, I mean, you know, Lewis tried it, didn't pull it off, and we all saw what happened on Sunday. Fernando made a fantastic start. He made up a bunch of positions early on, but other than that, again, you know, Sergio span out, didn't he? Almost hit the wall. It wasn't the most interesting, engaging. Like, they were both pretty processionary. The fact that no one's pitting is a bit of a problem. The fact that the points, we'll get into the points because I don't think they're pointless. 3, 2 and 1, what's the point? And we're not seeing that much variety in tyre strategy. Yes, Fernando and the McLarens ran soft tyres, Silverstone and Monza respectively, and benefited from that. Most people just stick mediums on and go to the end. There's definitely work to be done. And with all that, I thought I'd draft in my other Veloce co-host, Haydon, who has let's just say, a much more negative view of sprint qualifying than maybe I do.
Sprint quali for me needs to go in the deep, dark place that we put elimination quali. It hasn't worked, fair enough. We gave it a go, but unfortunately, it's been boring. We saw at the Italian Grand Prix, no one is going for overtakes. And when F1 is at its best, it's when drivers are willing to put their race on the line to go for overtakes. And because the race affects the following race, no one's going to do that for 0 points. And that's why it just doesn't work. Get rid of it, move on.
The jury is still very much out on whether this format can work. And I agree with what Haydon's saying there. Definitely, the races have been pretty stale, the sprint races that we've seen. But if you ask me, I don't think that's an inherent problem with sprint races. I think if they change some things around it, change some factors when it comes to tyres, pit stops, points, they could be really exciting. And I don't agree that the drivers aren't pushing. I feel like all of the drivers are pushing as hard as they do in the actual races. The only driver I haven't seen going for an overtake and really pushing as much as they could otherwise do was Verstappen in the Monza sprint race against Bottas, because he knew Bottas was starting at the back anyway. So what's the point of him trying it? There was no point. So you just keep that gap, you know? But that's where I come in. I'm today going to fix sprint qualifying. I know I'm well into the video before I've even mentioned this bit. This is a long one again. I think I've sorted it, you know? Starting with Thursday, it's just a press day. It's fine. Leave it as it is. Friday starts with FP1, and again, I'm cool with that. An hour is enough, I think. An hour before qualifying, minimal kind of testing time for the teams, make it a bit more unpredictable, right? No change there, but don't worry, because I'm definitely mixing up the Friday qualifying session. I'm going for it. I know this is a controversial one, but I'm going one shot qualifying that we haven't seen in F1 since 2006. It wasn't great in 2006. It was okay. Premise was good. The execution wasn't great. So I'm here to address the execution and make one shot qualifying great again. It was actually Fernando Alonso who made this suggestion after Monza, right? And Fernando knows what he's talking about. If qualifying is still 6 sets of tyres, which is like the Q1, Q2, Q3 that we have at the moment, we will end up with an actual order of car performance. Therefore, Saturday's sprint race will start from our position and we will finish in our position. If Friday's qualifying is a little different, 1 lap or something, for example, yesterday in Q2, I locked up the front tyres into turn 1, and with that lap, I would have started last today because I made a mistake. I will pay the price, start last, and maybe today I have a hard job to do. There is a sense of the sprint qualifying, it will be more spicy. Look, I very much agree. I think if you want the sprint race to be more exciting, you need to mix up qualifying a bit, but you don't want to make it too artificial. Don't worry, I'm not about to suggest ballast or any of that stuff. Like I really don't like artificially messing with the cars to make them slower than others. You know, I'm not about that at all. But a big part of the problem with one-shot qualifying last time, back in 2006, is that track evolution's a thing. The car that goes out last is going to have a better quality track. It's going to be more rubbered in. It's going to be less dirty than the first car that goes out who's cleaning the track as well as qualifying on it. Now, obviously, to mitigate that, you could put the fastest cars out first, but that wouldn't work. There is a psychological phenomenon called the peak end effect. And when you think about it, it obviously makes sense. You expect the peak, the most dramatic thing, to be at the end. Something that keeps you there, keeps you excited, keeps you engaged, that you're waiting for. You can't have a Lewis go out first, set a time that nobody beats. It's just a bit boring, isn't it? Whereas if he set the same lap time that is the quickest but goes out last, that's way more. You see the sectors go in purple. It's like it's way more engaging and more interesting. It's always, even in Q3 now, it's always more exciting when a car goes pole right at the end than it is on their first Q3 lap. So if the fastest cars have to go out last, how are we going to mitigate track evolution? Again, if you don't understand what track evolution means, it's essentially that when a circuit's not been raced on for a period of time, it obviously gets dirty, it gets dusty, and that kind of fine layer of dust and grit affects how these cars perform. So my suggestion for mitigating track evolution, not completely, but mostly, don't worry, it's not sprinklers, is, and I think this is genius, we get a standardized F1 branded Formula One chassis with an engine in the back, with the Pirelli tyres on, and a driver just canes that round the circuit for 30 minutes before qualifying starts to clean the track and rubber up the racing line a bit. I mean, we've seen the show car that they first showed off at Silverstone. It'd essentially be that. It wouldn't be a team-branded Formula One car. They wouldn't need to develop that car at all. Just get that chassis, stick a big engine in it, and then take that to every single race of the year, or every single sprint race, should I say. Stick, Nico Hulkenberg, Daniel Kvyat, an XF1 driver in that. Gives the crowd something to watch and something to whet the appetite before qualifying actually starts. It cleans up the racing line. Stick some fireworks, stick some sparklers on it as well. You've got all these fancy new graphics in Formula One. Make something out of the car. Heck, if they've got the budget, get 3 of them. They'll just clean the track and rubber it up even more, which means that when the 20 cars do go out, yes, of course, the final car will still have slightly better track conditions than the first car, but the gap won't be as significant as if the first car had to clean the track as well. You could stick another seat in it, get old Tiesto on his DJ set hanging out the back. Okay, maybe not that, but you know what I'm saying? I think that could work. F1 could definitely make the budget for that, right? They've already put all this effort, this R&D, this time into developing this more standardized rule set for Formula One. You've got the chassis there. Buy an engine from Alpine because they're not supplying anyone else at the minute. Stick that in the car, stick the Pirelli tyres on, job done. And then there is the other perceived problem with one-shot qualifying, which is changeable weather, which is, true. First car goes out, first few go out, and it's nice and dry. Then all of a sudden the heavens open and the last cars get rained out and, they're starting way behind because they got caught out by the weather. I get it. It's a factor, and it is more of a factor than it would typically be in the standard Q1, Q2, Q3 sessions, right? Changeable weather is always going to be a factor in motorsport. I mean, look at what happened to Lance Stroll last year in Turkey. He put it on pole. It's more likely for that to be a factor in one shot. But if the heavens decide to open, the heavens decide to open. And the whole point of doing this is to make these, Friday qualifying sessions a bit less predictable, to create a less predictable grid for sprint, right? Because again, say you've got the Haas's and the Alfa Romeos going out first, right? 4 of them set their times in dry conditions, good lap times. Then it starts raining. I mean, you could get a Haas and Alfa Romeo 1, 2, 3, 4, and you've not been any more artificial with it than you would be Stroll at Turkey last year. It was different. It was changed up because of the weather, but I wouldn't call that artificial in the same way you punish cars with ballast. That's artificial. I don't think if Mother Nature wants to rain on the track, then Mother Nature shall. There's plenty not perfect with our current qualifying system that one shot would completely solve. First of all, look at how many drivers get their laps snatched away because of traffic, because of cars going slowly and getting in the way. Not only is that unfair, Sebastian Vettel at Zandvoort, look at Fernando Alonso at Red Bull Ring. It wasn't fair because other cars got in the way, but also it's very dangerous. I mean, the closing speeds we often see in qualifying between these cars that are going slow and waiting to start their lap and cars on a flyer, particularly at shorter circuits like Zandvoort, like Austria, that is dangerous. That's going to result in a huge accident one day. Fortunately, we haven't seen one yet, but Jesus, we've come close. With one shot, that wouldn't be a factor. Then you look at Baku, Monaco, Zandvoort, all tracks with examples this year, and I'm sure there's been more, where drivers have been on fast laps, a car in front of them has crashed, and they've lost out their lap. I mean, especially at Monaco, about 48 drivers claimed that they were on for the pole time at Monaco, and then Charles crashed, and he just inherited it because he'd already set the fastest time up to that point. In one-shot qualifying, because people are setting their laps one at a time, if someone else crashes, then you just wait till the track's cleared and then you get your opportunity to show your skills and you're not hindered by someone else having an accident. What about tow? Like, some cars get tows, some don't, and then that leads to nonsense like you see at Monza, where no one wants to be at the front of the queue because no one wants to be the only person without getting a tow. Is that fair? Because then that just leads to, granted, it's quite funny sometimes. Like last year at Monza, I thought that was quite funny when everyone was just like, no one wanted to be in the front. But ultimately, is that really what we want to see? No, it's not. And again, that would be completely resolved with one shot because no one's getting a tow. So it is more even. And onto that point, look at Perez at Zandvoort, Stroll at Belgium. Both drivers just about missed the cutoff because they were stuck by loads of people going slowly, getting ready to set their lap times. just seems unnecessary. And one shot would once again completely resolve that, because there's no faffing about with trying to get your lap in time. You know what I mean? There's still plenty of negatives in the current qualifying system. I really like it, but it's not let's not try and pretend it's perfect. And one shot would fix a lot of those problems. And again, I want to allude to something that Fernando mentioned earlier, how like he made a mistake and he wasn't punished for it because he got another opportunity to set a lap. With one shot, on top of all these other factors, again, every single driver's just got one opportunity. If you bottle that, that's on you. You're going to have to use the sprint qualifying to try and come back through the field to have a good starting position for the race. I'm very confident that one shot quali done right would lead to less predictable, more interesting qualifying results. All right, on to Saturday, FP2. Again, I'd keep that the same. Parc fermé is obviously a thing. My understanding of it is that the cars go into parc fermé after FP1 for qualifying, then they come back out of parc fermé for FP2 to then be put back in it for sprint qualifying and the race. Parc fermé basically means you're not really allowed to mess with the car. You can make wing adjustments and that, but you have to, any fundamental changes to the car have to be made in FP1 or FP2. They can't be made kind of just before you go out for sprint qualifying or just before you start the race. And I'm happy to keep that way. The whole point of FP1 and FP2 should be so that the teams can change things up on the car and can mess around with things and see what works and what doesn't, especially in FP2 after they've had, qualifying on the Friday afternoon. But then on to Saturday afternoon and the sprint race. It's a race. It's not qualifying, it's a race. Stop calling it qualifying F1. It's not qualifying, it's a race. The 100 kilometre distance, I'm cool with that. A third of a normal race distance. That does it for me. 25 to 30 minutes. That's a good little race. I'm happy with that. 18 laps on a track like Monza. We had 17 at Silverstone. That'd be about 24 laps, 23 laps at a track like the Red Bull Ring that's a bit shorter. Now, again, coming into this sprint race, we would have a more changed up grid most of the time, hopefully. But I would make one other change to the format. Only one other change. I think these two would be enough to make it interesting. The introduction of a super hypersoft tyre. Maybe make that tyre available for the Friday qualifying as well. Maybe not. Not really sure. Or maybe just keep it exclusively to the sprint. If Pirelli can develop a set of tyres, their performance significantly drops off after 50, 60 kilometres, and they can make that a viable alternative to run in sprint where you start on the super softs, you pit, and then you come back out on another set of them, versus running the whole stint in one on a pair of softs or even mediums. That adds more strategy, that adds more unpredictability. Pit stops can go wrong, people can people can overcut. That's what we're not seeing in the current sprint format. Everyone's just driving a race, no one's pitting, and most of the time they're finishing where they started. And once again, this isn't just a suggestion from me, this was made by Lando after the sprint at Monza. Because you're just pushing the whole way, and even on the softest tyre, there's not really much degradation. Not a lot of stuff happens. And when we see a lot of racing tomorrow, on Sunday, it's going to be when the tyres go off and, different strategies rather than just racing. So whether we just have like an extreme hypersoft for the sprint race and people have to manage a bit more, maybe then you'll see something. It's true. That's the thing. And different cars wear their tyres different, like certain, I'm sure like a Ferrari chassis and an Aston Martin chassis driven in the same way will wear their tyres slightly different, right? And that's also a factor that Lando mentions here, like tyre management. I mean, let's look back to Formula 2 in 2020 at Hungary. The sprint race was a bit of a classic, great race. You had Luca Giotto, Callum Ilott up front. Callum was in the lead. They were both on mediums. Callum then pitted to put softs on. Giotto stayed out on the mediums. Ilott was like 15 seconds behind with about 3-4 laps to go. Closed that up to within a second by the last corner. Super close. He almost caught Giotto. The drama of Callum cutting through and you could see he was catching that time, was going down all the time. That's the kind of action we want to see in sprint qualifying. And I definitely think we could achieve that, just not with the way we're doing it currently. Different options and viable alternatives. Maybe there'll be some races where no one does a one stop. Maybe there'll be some where everyone does a one stop. And I'm sure there'll be some where it's about 50-50. To me, strategy is as an important part of the racing as the wheel-to-wheel action. So let's have at it. And then the final point on sprint qualifying itself is the points. Currently, P1 gets 3 points, P2 gets 2, and P3 gets 1. I just don't think that's enough. I think the drivers are pushing because they're motivated by starting higher. I mean, you look at how hard drivers push in qualifying. I think they'd be even more motivated if there was more points given to more drivers at the top. So rather than just the top 3 getting points, I'm saying the top 6 would get points. 10 points for P10, 8 for P2, 6 for P3, 4 for P4, 2 for P5, and 1 for P6. So again, that's a good, over a quarter of the grid would get points as well as benefiting from starting higher for the race. And we have to bear in mind that all of this is coming in the context of 2022. The regulations, cars should be able to follow closer. We should be getting better racing. We should be seeing less processionary. Again, Monza sprint was pretty processionary. It was pretty dull, let's be real. Regardless of all these changes that I'm making, the new cars should be able to fight and race more. And I think with the addition of my changes, it would be great, surely. And then on to Sunday, the race. Don't worry, I'm not messing with the race too much. The only thing I'd maybe suggest is giving the option to use those super soft, those hyper soft tyres, because then that might mean we might see some more 2 stops and more 3 stops. And I do think generally more pit stops are better. I'd love to see most teams doing 2 stops, but I don't want to necessarily mandate it in the rules. But I think more pit stops, the better, because again, there's no guarantee you're going to have a good pit stop, but you can gain a lot. I mean, you could have an 11-second shocker like Max Verstappen at Red Bull, or you could have a 1.8-second beauty like Max Verstappen's received many a time at Red Bull. So there we go. That is my suggested format for how sprint quali would be better, if you ask me. Do you agree? Let me know in the comments below. Do you think, have I missed anything? I'm sure I've missed. I do these videos, I'm sat on my own, I'm researching myself. I'm sure I've missed stuff. So do let me know in the comments below. But I think it's viable. I think it could be a thing. I think they could make it happen if they really wanted to, F1. And I think it'd make a more interesting and impressive spectacle than sprint qualifying is at the minute. Especially because the fact it's not qualifying, it's a race, okay? It's a race. Please drop a like on this video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to check. Just go check. You might not be. You might be, but you might not be. So make sure that red button is greyed out, because that means you're subscribed. My name's Tommo, as it typically is. Thanks again. Have a good one. Salah.